There is no law but equity. All else is policy. It's called the de facto doctrine. There is no law. There is only policy in fact and for the time being. Everything that we believe to be law is actually policy of the administrators, and the whole concept of law is just a false pretense. When you go into court, it's just a bunch of guys who are calling themselves a court. And if you fall for it, well, then you deserve it. And that's how their minds work. Up until the late, I think it was 1997 or so, the Governor General's website had a disclaimer on the website that said the government of Canada is de facto. And then when we pointed it out, they took it down. In the early days, they had separate court systems. You had a court of fact or equity. And then if the court of fact determined that there were sufficient facts to support a legal action, then it would be handed over to a judge of the courts of law for a legal determination. See, so that's where you get the two different. You have courts of equity, which were courts of fact, and courts of law. Equity is to fact as law is to fiction. Equity is to virtue as law is to coercion or vice. Equity means to do what is right according to conscience and for its own sake. That's what equity is. Law means to do what somebody else tells you to do at the point of a gun.
Right here.
Well, but equity is virtue. See,
right.
Law is to evil as equity is to virtue. And that's what most people don't understand. See, law is and is recognized in law as an inherently evil thing that has to be very judicially administered in order to contain its evil.
Can you say it all over again? So law is to...
Law is to evil as equity is to virtue. Equity is it means conscience. It means to do what's right according to conscience, to do the right thing. And the Bible says do equity. Do the right thing for its own sake, and you'll turn out all right. You know?
Beautiful.
You see, now once the facts are determined, and that's where all the really keen minds tend to gravitate to, they became judges of the courts of equity or fact because fact finding is the province of a keen intellect. See, it's determining what really happened and all that. And as I say, once those facts have been determined, then and the facts were handed over to a court of law for a legal determination. The judges of the courts of law were more or less clerks. They could anybody can look up the law once the facts have been determined. But what they recognized early on in English law was that you cannot have the same judge deciding both the facts and the law in a given dispute. Because and the other thing was the one profession in the world who could never become a judge was a practicing lawyer.
It's everybody.
Yeah. You see, now they recognize that lawyers are professional language manipulators. And to appoint a professional language manipulator to be a judge is, pardon my imagery, but it's the same as having convicted child molesters run daycare centers.
Well, and that's kind of what we got.
The only reason Parliament ever has to make a law is in reaction to a wrongful state of affairs. See, every enactment is deemed remedial and shall be given such fair, large, and liberal interpretation as best achieves its objects, or the attainment of its objects. See, law is and is recognized in law as an inherently evil thing that has to be very judicially administered in order to contain its evil. See, they can't just make a law for the sheer mindless hell of it. It has to be in answer to a wrongful state of affairs or situation. But once they started getting in all this sort of activist legislation, they find it and say, well, the wrongful state of affairs is inequality and all the rest of it, and so we need to have laws to even this out. And then once they got that, what do they call it, the thin end of the wedge in, we've been expanding ever since, and it's kind of sad. But anyways, law is to evil as equity is to virtue. So once they get you to the point where everybody is trained to worship the rule of law, you're worshiping the rule of evil.
Right.
And you don't realize it. You think it. That's why so many people will tell you to put on a mask in such self-righteous, it's the law. No, it's policy. It's not the law to begin with, and by the time you get anyway.
No, it's evil and it's abusive.
You see, let's say you've got two brothers and they inherit an acre of land or a couple of acres of land in the woods. And one of the brothers cuts down all the trees and makes lumber out of it and creates a cabin and everything and builds the house. And they, for whatever reason, they register the property in the name of the other brother. Okay? Now, in law, the brother who did nothing is the legal owner. But the brother who actually built the house is the equitable owner, or has an equitable interest in it.
Right.
And so if they have a falling out and the brother who's got the legal title says, well, you're out of luck, my brother, you shouldn't have annoyed me or got into a fight with me, so now I'm going to make sure you don't get anything. Well, that brother could file an equity lien. That brother could file an equity lien. No, you don't file an equity lien, you publish it. See, a legal lien gains its power from legislation and registration. An equity lien gains its power from publication and knowledge in fact. See, so nobody is going to buy that house knowing that it was that even though they can buy the legal title, they don't want the grief that's going to be associated with the fact that this other guy has got a valid equity claim to it. And that's why you publish the equity lien. And that's what Werex does. Werex has published an equity lien on the equity title to all the paper you ever gave to the bank. Werex has published an equity lien on the equity title to all the paper you ever gave to the bank. What Werex is I've claimed a salvage lien and salvage title on $150 trillion worth of mortgage equity worldwide and put it into a trust in favor of the rightful owners of it. And so it's just a matter of getting people to understand that this $150 trillion trust is being converted into a new kind of Bitcoin, or it's called BEECs, bonded equity exchange credits. The total number of bonded equity exchange coins, credits, are defined by the total amount that people have been ripped off of by the system. Okay? And so if you've had $1 million worth of mortgages in your life, worth of principal amount, you just have to claim for it. And we'll give you $1 million worth of coins at the same $1 exchange rate. And it's free. It has to be free because you already own it. It's equity you got cheated out of. So now we can get it back through salvage law. It's legitimate. It's the right way to do it. It's the proper remedy for the actual crime that's been committed. And that's what we're doing under Werex, is we're saying we've got an equity, an unassailable equity claim because they've already admitted that they stole it from us. You just have to know where to look. And but they're not, but remember, there is no money. There's only information about money. So we can't send a raiding party over to get it back from them because there's nothing there except computer. There's just information. But all the information is contained in the public land title registries. Now, what happened was we said, okay, that's the electronic version. This is the the hard. We sent out 20-some copies of this to all of these parties at the front, including the RCMP Commercial Crime Division.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Now, this thing was delivered to the RCMP on Monday morning. Well, I'm assuming about 9 a.m. would have been as early as they would have got their mail. Yeah. I got a call from the officer in charge of the Commercial Crime Division at 11 o'clock or 11:30 in the morning, just a couple hours later, saying they had decided to close the file. There will be no action taken, even though I pointed out all 24 serious offenses here and that it's all prima facie. You don't have to prove anything. It's in the bank's own writing, and the lawyers. And he said, we decided it's a civil matter.
Uh-huh.
Saying, well, yeah, of course it's a civil matter, but it's also a criminal matter, up the yin-yang. And I said, but how could you have read that? It's 200 and some pages long. She said, oh, I'm a very fast reader. Take her at her word. It's a civil matter. Oh, they just validated Werex. See, we're treating it as a civil matter instead of a criminal matter. But technically, you see, if you're issuing a security, you cannot set up the defense that you didn't know what it was that your security said. You can't argue that you never read your own security.
Right.
It's like, so at any rate, I mean, you've got several thousand police officers across Canada that have got their own home mortgages. And they were tricked into signing these things too. How is a police officer going to do his job knowing that he has committed strict liability, fraud, and forgery?
Right.
And that it was made a condition of the loan by his buddy, the lawyer, wait a minute, Yeah. And we had this happen with, I caught him in 93 or 4. The bank was literally falsifying its records to charge the home hardware franchise owner interest on advances the bank had never made. They were just literally just cooking their books. And he took my preliminary report to the local RCMP in Vermilion Bay, Ontario. And the RCMP was a young guy, and he read it, and he said to the effect, well, that's not high finance, that's just theft. and he went over all gung-ho to see the manager of the Bank of Montreal. And then 3 days later, he was called into the Royal Bank where he and his wife had their own home mortgage.
Right.
And he was informed by innuendo that if he persisted in this thing at the Montreal, the Royal Bank management would probably lose confidence in him and might be forced to call his own mortgage in. See, and I said, well, welcome to Canada.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's really been a pleasure. I'm going to show your website one more time.
It's still kind of a work in progress. It's all text, and you can download the stuff, you read it. I would go through the whole menu and download everything.
That's where I was going to go with that, for the audience to have an understanding of what Tim's remedy could be with this.
Yeah.
And it's vital information.
And if you will read this stuff and take the time to do it, it's like I've had guys call me that are like professionals, dentists and doctors and that, and they say, this stuff is addictive. I keep reading it over and over again, and I honestly think I'm gaining 1 IQ point every time I do. And but there's a limit on that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's why we wanted to have you on, because you shorten the span for us. From you, what I get from you is the enthusiasm, the life, the clear purpose, the clear path. You are a king hero.